My father left me a motorcycle, and 200 men came to collect the debt.
The garage smelled like every good memory Willa Decker had ever made. Motor oil, cold metal, the faint ghost of cedar from the workbench her father had built with salvaged lumber when she was 4 years old. She stood in the doorway for a moment before stepping inside, one hand resting on the wooden frame, letting the smell settle into her lungs like something she needed to hold on to. Outside, November rain hammered the aluminum siding of the house on Keswick Road. It was the kind of rain that had no interest in stopping, the kind that soaked through jackets in 30 seconds and made the drive home from a double shift feel like crossing open water. Willa had been home for 11 minutes. She had not yet gone inside to check on her mother. She had come here first to the garage the way some people go to church. She was 22 years old. She had the kind of face that had been pretty once in a soft, uncomplicated way, but the last 8 months had sharpened it. Her jaw was set. Her eyes moved quickly and settled slow. She was not a girl who startled easily, and she was not a girl who cried where anyone could see her. These were things she had learned from her father, and she wore them the way she wore his old flannel work shirt, slightly too large across the shoulders, frayed at the cuffs, irreplaceable. She pulled the string on the single overhead bulb. The light came on yellow and unsteady. In the center of the garage, covered by a heavy gray canvas tarp, sat the shape she had been avoiding for 3 days. Willa walked toward it slowly. She had walked toward it the same way every time she came in here slowly, the way you approach something that might still be alive. She gripped the edge of the tarp with both hands. Her knuckles were raw from the cold and from 8 hours of carrying plates and refilling coffee cups and smiling at people who never once looked at her face. She stood there with the canvas in her hands and did not pull it back. Not yet. The sound came through the wall behind her, a soft, rhythmic, mechanical wheeze, steady as a metronome. The oxygen concentrator in her mother's room, keeping its patient count through the night. Willa had learned to sleep through that sound 6 months ago, the same way soldiers learn to sleep through artillery. But right now, standing in the garage with her hands on the tarp, she heard every cycle of it like a clock counting down. She pulled the canvas back. The 1993 Harley-Davidson Fat Boy gleamed under the yellow bulb, as if the 5 years it had spent under that tarp had meant nothing to it. The paint was a deep midnight blue, so dark it looked black until the light hit it at the right angle, and then it opened up into something oceanic, something that had depth and motion in it. The chrome was spotless. The leather seat was supple and uncracked. On the cast tank, hand-painted 23 years ago by a man named Del Pruitt, who had since lost 3 fingers and retired to Tucson, was the image that Willa had stared at her whole life without ever fully understanding it. A silver eagle wing spread wide talons locked around a broken chain. Her father had designed that image himself. He had sketched it on a paper grocery bag at the kitchen table one Sunday morning when Willa was 7, his enormous hand moving the pencil with a delicacy that never matched his size. When she asked him what it meant, he had folded the paper and said, "That is a story for later, baby girl." And then later never came. Big Earl Decker had been a union steelworker out of the local 3 Hall on Webster Avenue for 26 years. He was 6 feet 4 inches and 240 pounds of a man who fixed things. Broken pipes, broken engines, broken neighbors. He fixed them all the same way, quietly and completely, without making a production of it. He had hands like catcher's mitts and a laugh that came up from somewhere so deep it sounded like the building itself was amused. He had coached Little League for 11 years without ever having a son on the team. He had shoveled the driveways of every elderly person on Keswick Road every winter without being asked. He had not owned a single thing that could be described as decorative, except for this motorcycle, this one extravagant and unexplained object that sat in his garage like a secret he had decided to keep in plain sight. He had died on a Tuesday morning in February of 2021, 5 years ago now, in the driveway of this same house, a massive coronary. He had been carrying a bag of road salt to spread on the front walk so Loretta would not slip on her way to the car. The doctor said it was fast. Willa was 17 years old and she had been the one to find him. She did not let herself think about that part. She had become very good at not letting herself think about that part. She picked up microfiber cloth from the workbench and began wiping dust from the chrome exhaust pipes, moving slowly, methodically, the way her father had taught her to do any job worth doing. She cleaned the headlight housing, She cleaned the fender brace. She moved around the bike the way you move around something holy. When she reached the seat, she stopped. She had come out here tonight for a specific reason. She had been putting it off for 3 days and she was done putting it off. She needed photographs. Good ones. The kind that would catch the eye of a serious buyer scrolling through listings at midnight. She pulled out her phone and turned on the harsh blue-white of the camera flash and started shooting. She photographed the tank and the Silver Eagle. She photographed the engine block and the odometer, which read 12,040 miles, almost nothing for a 33-year-old machine. She photographed the custom chrome and the original leather and the floorboards that had never once been replaced. She worked with focus and efficiency, and she did not let herself feel anything about it. Then she unlatched the seat to photograph the storage cavity underneath, and she saw the envelope. It had been there long enough that the edges had taken on a faint yellow tinge from the humidity of the garage. It was a standard white letter envelope, sealed with 2 words written on the front in black marker in her father's handwriting. The handwriting of a man who had been made to write large because his hands were too big for small movements. She recognized every loop and angle of it, the way she recognized the sound of his truck in the driveway. For Willa, she stood there with the seat raised and the envelope in her hand and the phone still in her other hand with the camera still on. She did not move for a long time. Then she saw what was written below her name smaller in the same black marker. Not yet. She read it twice. She read it a third time. She set the phone on the workbench. She turned the envelope over in her hands. The seal held. Whatever was inside had been waiting for her for a long time, patient, as the bike itself and her father had decided she was not supposed to have it yet. Not yet. Willa understood something about her father. He did not do things without reasons. He did not write notes he did not mean. If he had written not yet, he had a reason for that too. She placed the envelope back in the cavity under the seat. She lowered the seat and latched it. She picked up her phone and finished taking the photographs. She turned off the overhead light. She stood in the dark for one moment with the rain still hammering outside and the machine in the next room running its quiet mechanical rhythm through the wall. Mom first, she said to no one. She went inside. Loretta Decker was asleep in the adjustable hospital bed that now occupied the master bedroom where she and Earl had slept for 24 years. She was 61 years old, and the disease had taken 40 pounds from her in 8 months and made her look 20 years older than that. The oxygen cannula rested across her upper lip. The concentrator sat on the floor beside the bed, its green light steady and mechanical. The room smelled of antiseptic and lavender, which was Loretta's attempt to make the antiseptic bearable. Willa stood in the doorway. She watched her mother sleep for a moment, the slow, difficult rise and fall of her chest, and then she went to the kitchen. She sat at the table with her laptop open. She had been doing research for a week. Vintage custom Fat Boys with documented provenance and original parts in excellent condition. The market was narrow, but it was real. Conservative estimate, $25,000 to $28,000 to the right buyer. Maybe more with the right listing. She needed $48,000. Dr. Marcus Webb, the pulmonologist at Miami Valley Hospital, had called her 3 days ago. He had been gentle about it. He was always gentle about it, and Willa had come to understand that the gentleness was a kind of warning. He had explained again that Loretta's insurance covered standard care, but categorically excluded the experimental preoperative treatment protocol required to qualify her for bilateral lung transplant candidacy. The out-of-pocket cost for that protocol was $48,000. Without it, Loretta could not be placed on the transplant registry. Without the registry, the prognosis was what it was. Yesterday, Dr. Webb had mentioned hospice. He had said the word quietly in the same tone people use when they are offering you a door. They want you to think is a window. Willa had thanked him for the information and ended the call and gone to work her evening shift at the warehouse, because the alternative was sitting in this kitchen thinking about what hospice meant. She had already sold her grandmother's jewelry. She had maxed out the 2 credit cards she had. She had applied for a personal loan at 2 banks and been declined at both. She was working 60 hours a week between the diner and the warehouse, and every dollar went directly to the mortgage and the pharmacy and the grocery store and the endless small costs of keeping someone alive in this particular grinding way. The bike was the last option. It had always been the last option. Big Earl had said it himself years ago with that laugh of his. He had said if things ever went completely sideways, that machine was the insurance policy. She had thought he was joking. She was not laughing now. She uploaded the photographs to 3 platforms: a national vintage motorcycle auction site, a high-end biker forum with active listings, and the local Dayton classifieds, because sometimes the right buyer was closer than you thought. She wrote the listing with precision. 1993 Harley-Davidson Fat Boy, custom midnight blue paint, original hand-painted tank artwork, all original parts, 12,000 miles, excellent condition, clean title, asking 28,000 cash only firm. She read it back once, then she pressed post. She closed the laptop. She sat in the kitchen with the rain still going outside and the house making its nighttime sounds around her. She did not let herself think about the envelope under the seat. She did not let herself think about the look on her mother's face the last time she had been well enough to sit at this table. She thought about the listing and whether the photographs were good enough, and whether 28,000 was too high or too low, and whether she should have listed it on more platforms. She was still thinking about this when she finally went to bed at 12:30. The next 3 days were an education in the specific cruelty of desperate transactions. The listing generated 47 responses in the first 24 hours. Willa read every one. There were scammers who wanted to pay with cashier checks drawn on banks that did not exist. There were collectors who opened with, "What I can do is 18, and then acted personally offended when she said no. There was a man who drove 40 minutes from Centerville, spent 2 hours in the garage talking about every motorcycle he had ever owned, drank 3 cups of her coffee, and left without making an offer. There was a teenager who offered to trade a PlayStation and a dirt bike with a bent frame. There were 11 people who said some version of "I am very interested" and then never responded again. By Thursday evening, Willa had received no serious offers. That night, Loretta had a bad episode. Her oxygen saturation dropped to 84% at 2 in the morning, and Willa sat beside her for 3 hours adjusting the concentrator flow rate and taking readings every 15 minutes until it stabilized at 91. She did not sleep after that. She sat in the kitchen and watched the sky go from black to gray to the pale, thin white of a November dawn. Dr. Webb called at 8. He was gentle again. He said that given the progression over the last 2 weeks, he wanted to discuss next steps. He said the word timeline. He said he understood this was very difficult. Willa thanked him again and ended the call and picked up her car keys. She was not going to sit in this kitchen and let the timeline run out. She called her friend Dana to sit with Loretta for the morning. She borrowed Dana's truck and the small utility trailer that Dana's husband kept in the backyard. She loaded the Harley, carefully taking 40 minutes to do it right, using tie-downs at 4 points the way her father had taught her. She drove to Harlan's Vintage Motorsports on Cincinnati Avenue. She had looked up Glenn Harlan before she went. He had a website with professional photographs and a tagline that said Dayton's premier destination for classic American iron. He had been in business for 18 years. He had a reputation in the local biker community that depended entirely on who you asked. The buyers liked him. The sellers tended to use other words. The showroom smelled of expensive watch and the kind of espresso machine that cost more than a used car. Display lighting hit every bike at a calculated angle. The floors were polished concrete. It was a place designed to make you feel like whatever you were selling was slightly beneath the room. Glenn Harlan came out of the back office wearing a tailored vest and the expression of a man who had already decided how the next 10 minutes were going to go. He was somewhere in his mid-50s, trim, with gray at his temples and the kind of tan that does not come from outdoor work. He looked at Willa and then passed her toward the trailer in the parking lot. She explained the situation in the shortest possible terms. 1993 Fat Boy, custom tank, original parts, 12,000 miles, clean title. She needed a quick cash sale. Before she walked in, and she had done something she had learned to do over 8 months of navigating medical billing departments and insurance appeals processes, and every institutional conversation where the person across the desk said one thing to your face and wrote something different in the file. She had turned on the voice memo application on her phone. She had slipped the phone into her jacket pocket with the microphone facing out. She had done it the way she did everything now, without announcement, without drama, as a simple practical measure against a world that had shown her repeatedly that documentation was not paranoia but preparation. Harlan walked outside and circled the trailer twice. He did not touch anything. He looked at the midnight blue paint for a long time without expression, the way an appraiser looks at a painting he has already decided to undervalue. "That is a beautiful piece of work," he said. "The custom job is impressive, but you have to understand that personalized artwork is a limitation, not an asset. That silver eagle is someone else's tattoo. Most serious buyers want a blank canvas. Plus 5 years of storage takes a toll regardless of how careful the previous owner was. Seals dry out, carburetors gum up. I would need to put significant money into getting it market ready." Willa said nothing. She had decided before she walked in that she would listen to the full offer before she responded to anything. Harlan rubbed the back of his neck. He said that given the restoration costs and the current market, he could go to $8,000 cash right now, which was a favor to her given the circumstances. $8,000, Willa said. She said it the same way you repeat a number to make sure you heard it correctly without inflection, without accusation, just the words. Harlan said the market was soft. He said she was not going to find a better cash offer in Dayton today. He said if she wanted to wait for a collector from out of state, she was welcome to, but that could take months, and he understood she was working with a timeline. She had not told him about her mother. She had not mentioned the hospital or the money or any of it. She had said only that she needed a quick cash sale. He knew anyway. That was what he did. He found the soft places and he pressed on them. Willa said, "Thank you for your time." She said it politely and turned and walked toward the door. She kept her pace steady. She did not hurry. She counted the steps to the exit the way she had learned to count things when she needed to stay calm. She was almost to the door when she heard Harlan's voice drop into a different register, slightly quieter, the voice of a man who had stopped performing. She heard the soft sound of a phone being dialed. She slowed her walk without stopping. She heard him say, "It is a clean title. Fat Boy, 1993, original custom, tank, 12,000 miles. The girl is desperate. She walked at my 8. Give her until Thursday and she will be back at 6. Lock your buyer in Cincinnati at 35, and we split the margin." "Yes, I am certain." Willa pushed through the door and walked to the trailer. She stood beside it in the cold gray morning air. She breathed in through her nose and out through her mouth slowly the way she had taught herself to do when the anger was large enough to make things unclear. Then she took her phone out of her pocket and stopped the recording. She drove home. She unloaded the bike alone, taking the same 40 minutes in reverse, doing it right. She put the tarp back on. She put the tie-downs back where they belonged. She stood in the garage for a moment and looked at the shape under the canvas. 8,000, while a buyer in Cincinnati was standing by at 35. She went inside and sat at the kitchen table and opened her laptop. She went back to the biker forum where she had posted the listing. She refreshed the responses. There was a new one time-stamped 40 minutes ago while she had been driving home. The sender field read SC Iron Brotherhood MC. The subject line read The Blue Fat Boy. She opened it. The message was 6 sentences. There were no pleasantries. The first sentence said, "I know that eagle on the tank and I know what it means." The second sentence said, "Do not sell to Glenn Harlan under any circumstances." The third sentence said, "He already has a buyer lined up at triple your asking price." The fourth sentence said, "Come outside tomorrow morning at 9. The fifth sentence said, "Have the title ready." The sixth sentence was not a sentence, it was a file attachment. She opened it. It was a photograph. Black and white, low resolution, clearly scanned from a print, the kind of photograph taken before everyone had a camera in their pocket. It showed the shoulder of a highway at night, lit by emergency vehicle flashlights, the silhouette of something large and crumpled in the background that might have been a truck. In the foreground stood 3 men. 2 of them wore leather cuts. The third was massive, 6'4", 240 pounds. His arms wrapped in thick white field dressings, from the wrist to the shoulders. His chest bandaged beneath a shirt someone had cut open at the front. He was grinning. Not the grin of a man who did not understand what had just happened to him. The grin of a man who understood exactly what had just happened and found it in some deep and private part of himself to be perfectly acceptable. Willa knew that grin. She had seen it every day of her life for 17 years. She knew the hands too, even wrapped in dressings. She knew the shape of them, the size, the particular way her father held his arms slightly away from his sides when he was standing still as if he was always ready to pick something up. She looked at the dressings. She thought about the story he had told her and her mother 100 times over the years, the shrug and the smile, and the explanation that always arrived in the same 5 words. Welding accident, old scar, nothing. She looked at the photograph for a long time. She reached for the envelope that was still in the garage under the seat of the motorcycle, and then remembered that it was still in the garage under the seat of the motorcycle. Tomorrow, she said quietly to the photograph on her screen. She closed the laptop. She got up and checked on her mother. Loretta was awake, looking at the ceiling, and she turned her head when Willa came in, and the look on her face was the particular look that Willa had become fluent in, the one that said, "I know what you are doing, and I need you to know that I know, and I need you to know that I love you for it, even though it is breaking both of us." Willa sat on the edge of the bed and took her mother's hand. They did not talk about the money. They did not talk about the bike. They talked about a show Loretta had been watching on the television, a nature documentary about birds of prey, and whether eagles were actually as impressive as people made them out to be, or whether that was just national mythology. Willa said she thought they were probably as impressive as advertised. Loretta said she thought the osprey was underrated. They sat like that for a while with the concentrator cycling and the rain finally slowing to a drizzle outside, and Willa held her mother's hand and thought about the photograph and the envelope and the 6 sentences from SC, Iron Brotherhood MC, and she thought about a man on fire on a highway in the middle of the night, and a pry bar, and a pickup truck, and a story told as nothing told, as accident told as scar for 24 years. She went to bed at 11. She lay in the dark. She thought about the eagle on the gas tank talons locked around a chain that had been broken. She thought about her father designing that image at the kitchen table on a Sunday morning when she was 7, his big hand moving the pencil with impossible delicacy, and she thought about how he had folded the paper when she asked him what it meant. That is a story for later, baby girl. She stared at the ceiling for a long time. Then she closed her eyes and lay still and waited for morning, which was the only thing left to do. Willa did not sleep past 5. She lay in bed for 20 minutes listening to the concentrator in the next room and the last of the rain tapping against the window glass. And then she got up because lying still had stopped being restful sometime around month 3 of this, and she had made her peace with that. She made coffee. She stood at the kitchen window and watched the sky go from black to the deep bruised purple of an Ohio November dawn, and she thought about nothing in particular, which was the closest she could get to rest anymore. By 6:45, she had checked on Loretta, adjusted the concentrator flow, left a glass of water and the morning medications on the bedside table, and eaten half a piece of toast standing over the sink. By 7:30, she had showered and dressed in jeans and her father's flannel shirt and her heaviest work boots, the ones with the steel toes that had belonged to Earl, and that she had worn so long the insoles had taken the shape of her feet instead of his. By 8, she was sitting on the front porch steps with a mug of coffee watching the street. Keswick Road on a Friday morning was the same as it was every morning. Mr. Thibodeau across the street was retrieving his newspaper from the end of his driveway in his robe and slippers, moving slowly the way a man moves when his knees have earned the right to complain. The Brennan house 2 doors down had its porch lights still on. A single crow sat on the power line above the sidewalk and looked down at Willa with the specific indifference of something that has decided you are not a threat and therefore not interesting. The street was quiet. Then it was not. Willa felt it first in the soles of her boots, a vibration in the concrete step beneath her, faint and rhythmic and building. The coffee mug in her hand trembled almost imperceptibly. She looked up from it. Down the block at the far end of Keswick, where it met the main avenue, she could see nothing yet. But she could hear it low and syncopated, a sound like a storm arriving from a direction you had not expected. Mr. Thibodeau stopped walking. He was standing at the end of his driveway with his newspaper rolled under his arm and his head turned toward the avenue, and even from across the street, Willa could see that he had gone very still, in the way that people go still when they cannot yet identify what they are hearing, but their body has already decided it is significant. The first motorcycle came around the corner. It was massive, blacked out with high handlebars, and a rider in a heavy leather cut over a dark hoodie. It moved at an unhurried pace, deliberate, the engine at low idle, which somehow made it louder, not quieter, the way a voice dropped to just above a whisper in a quiet room carries further than a shout. Behind the first bike came 2 more riding side by side. Behind those came 4. Behind those came 8. And then the corner itself disappeared, swallowed by the procession, still turning off the avenue, bike after bike after bike, emerging in perfect two-column formation, leather and chrome, and the deep rhythmic thunder of V-twin engines that Willa felt not just in her boots now, but in her sternum, in her back teeth, in the base of her skull. They filled the street from curb to curb. They stretched back around the corner and out of sight. Mr. Thibodeau dropped his newspaper. He did not bend to pick it up. He took 3 steps backward toward his front door, his eyes fixed on the procession, and then he was inside and the door was closed, and Willa heard the deadbolt turn from across the street. Curtains moved in the Brennan house. Then the light in the front window went off. The procession continued. Bike after bike after bike, 2 abreast, filling Keswick Road with a wall of sound and exhaust and chrome that made the bare November trees along the sidewalk shudder. On the back of every leather cut was the same patch, red and white, a winged skull with rockers, above and below the name of a club that Willa recognized the way most people recognized it, as a name that carried weight in the way that certain names do not, because of what you know about them specifically, but because of what the weight itself tells you. Iron Brotherhood MC. There were not a dozen of them. There were not 30. Willa stood up from the porch step. She counted past 50 and stopped counting. The lead rider raised a single-gloved hand. The gesture moved back through the column like a wave, and the engines cut off one by one. The silence arriving in sections, rolling toward her from the far end of the street, until the last engine died and Keswick Road was quieter than it had been before they arrived. The way a room is quieter after a sound than it was before the sound began. 200 motorcycles sat in front of her house. The lead rider kicked his stand down and swung off the bike. He was tall, 6'3", at least broad across the shoulders, in the way that comes from decades of physical work rather than a gym. His beard was dark gray, thick braided at the bottom with a small leather wrap. He wore a cut over a black thermal no helmet, and his face was the face of a man who had made a great number of decisions in his life and had stopped second-guessing any of them. The patch on his chest read President. He walked up the driveway. 2 men dismounted and followed him, staying a few steps back, their expressions unreadable behind dark lenses. The president stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. He looked up at Willa. His eyes were pale blue, the kind of pale that looks cold until you see something move behind them. "You, Willa Decker," he said. It was not a question. "Yes," Willa said. "I am Stone Carver." He said it the same way her father used to say his own name, as a complete sentence, not an introduction. As a fact being established. She held his gaze. She did not step back. "We need to see the bike," Stone said. She led them around the side of the house to the garage. The 200 men behind them remained in the street. No one spoke. No engine started. The silence from that many people was its own kind of sound. Willa lifted the garage door and stepped inside and turned on the overhead light. She walked to the center of the room and took hold of the gray canvas tarp. She looked back at Stone. "I do not know what any of this is," she said. "I do not know why you are here with 200 people or what my father had to do with your club. But I need to tell you that my mother is sick and she is in that house, and I need $48,000 by end of business today, or the hospital moves her to hospice. So whatever this is, I need it to be honest, and I need it to be fast." Stone looked at her for a moment. Something shifted in the pale blue eyes. Not softness, exactly more like recognition, the look of a man who has met someone who reminded him of someone else. "Pull the tarp," he said. She pulled it. The midnight blue fat boy caught the light, the way it always did, deep and oceanic, the silver eagle on the tank, bright as the day Del Pruitt had painted it. The broken chain in the eagle's talons, the spread wings. The image her father had designed on a Sunday morning at the kitchen table and never fully explained. Stone Carver stepped forward. He moved the way large men move when they are being careful, slowly with intention. He pulled off his right glove and tucked it into his belt. He reached out and placed his open hand flat against the gas tank palm, resting over the silver eagle, and he stood there with his eyes closed for a moment that felt much longer than it was. Behind him, one of the 2 men who had followed them, in a heavy-set man, with a scar that ran from his left ear to his jaw and a tattoo across his throat, removed his sunglasses and bowed his head. Not in deference to Stone, in something older than deference, something that looked like a man standing at a grave. Stone opened his eyes. He looked up at the single bulb on the ceiling. His jaw worked once. "It is real," he said quietly. 24 years, and Big Earl kept it like the day we gave it to him. He lowered his hand. He turned to look at Willa. "You knew my father," she said. "Stone said your father was not a member of this club. He never wore our patch, and he never asked to. He was a union man his whole life, and that is what he was. But there are different kinds of brothers. And your father was more of a brother to this club than men who have worn our colors for 20 years. He reached into the inner pocket of his cut and took out a phone. He turned it to face her. It was the same photograph that had been attached to the email. The highway shoulder at night, the two men in cuts, the third man massive arms wrapped in field dressings to the shoulder chest bandaged grinning. That was taken 40 minutes after it happened, Stone said. The paramedics had already worked on him once. He would not get in the ambulance until someone took that picture. Said he wanted proof it had happened because he knew nobody would believe him. That was your father. He turns himself into a human torch, and his first concern is documentation. Willa looked at the photograph. She looked at the dressings on her father's arms. Interstate 70, Stone said. October of 2001. We were riding back from a run in Kentucky, about 30 of us moving east on 70 outside of Dayton. It was late after midnight, a straight, empty stretch of highway. A semi-driver fell asleep. He drifted across 2 lanes at 70 miles an hour and came through the middle of our pack like a blade through grass. Stone stopped. He looked at the wall for a moment. When he continued, his voice was level, but the levelness required effort. Bikes went everywhere. There was fire, immediately fuel on hot metal in the dark. Rex Blackwood, our national president, was thrown from his bike and went under the burning cab of the semi. The fuel tank on that truck had ruptured. The whole front end was burning. Rex was pinned. We could see him. We could not get to him. Several of our men had broken bones. One had a fractured skull. The ones who could stand were trying to find something, anything to move that wreckage, and there was nothing. No leverage. No tool. The tank was going to blow. We were watching our president burn alive, and there was nothing any of us could do about it. Stone's eyes came back to Willa. Then a pickup truck stopped on the shoulder. A Union pickup flatbed coming back from a double shift at the mill. The driver did not slow down to look. He did not call it in and wait. He put it in park and got out and went to his flatbed and got a 4-foot steel pry bar and ran straight into the fire. Willa said nothing. He was already burned before he got the bar under the frame, Stone said. He worked it twice and could not get enough leverage, and he repositioned and burned more, and then he got his legs under him and lifted. Not the bar, him. He used the bar as a fulcrum, and he lifted with his body. He burned all the hair off both arms from wrist to shoulder. He had 3rd-degree burns across his chest where the heat came through his shirt. He held the wreckage up long enough for 2 of our men to drag Rex out. 10 seconds after Rex was clear, the fuel tank blew. The concussive force knocked your father 30 feet down the shoulder of the highway. Stone let that sit for a moment. He got up, Stone said. He walked back to where Rex was lying. He checked his pulse. Then he sat down next to him on the asphalt and waited for the ambulance, and he would not get in it until Rex was in one first. Willa was looking at the photograph again. She was looking at the grin. That specific grin she had seen 1,000 times, the one that meant the situation had been assessed and found to be acceptable. He blew out his shoulder in the lift, and Stone continued. He told us it was minor. It was not minor. He was limited in the mill for the rest of his career. Never worked full capacity again. He never mentioned it to us. We found out 3 years later from someone who worked his floor. Willa said he told us it was a welding accident. The burns the shoulder. He said it was a welding accident. He said it once and then he never talked about it again. Stone nodded. That is exactly what he said to us when we asked him why he had not told his family. He said a welding accident is the same thing, just slower. The man with the throat tattoo made a sound that was not quite a laugh. It was the sound of a man who had been holding something for a long time and just felt it shift. Willa set the phone down on the workbench. She pressed both hands flat against the metal surface and looked at the floor for a moment. Stone said Rex spent 6 months in the hospital. His lungs never fully recovered from the smoke. He has been on supplemental oxygen for the better part of a decade. When he was released, he wanted to compensate your father. Money, whatever Big Earl wanted. Rex was not a poor man, and he understood debts. Your father refused everything. He said what he said. A man's life is not an invoice. Rex had the bike built from scratch. He painted the eagle himself. The broken chain is the brotherhood symbol for cheating death. Rex gave the bike to your father and told him that as long as that machine was in his possession, he had 200 men at his back. Anytime, any place, no questions. Willa looked at the silver eagle, the talons locked around the broken chain. Your father never called it in, Stone said. Not once in 24 years, not for anything. We checked on him over the years, quietly, the way he would have wanted. We knew about your mother's diagnosis. We knew about the hospital bills. We have been waiting for a call that never came. And then 3 days ago, one of our men in the Dayton area was in a diner and overheard Glenn Harlan bragging to a buyer on the phone about a desperate girl practically giving away a custom Fat Boy with a silver eagle on the tank. Willa looked up. Stone said Glenn Harlan has done that to a lot of people. You were not his first. We have been watching him for 2 years. Willa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, how much did he tell the buyer? 35,000, Stone said. She reached into her jacket pocket and took out her phone. She pulled up the voice memo application and found the recording from Harlan's showroom. She pressed play. The audio was clear. The showroom had good acoustics. Harlan's voice came through without distortion. It is a clean title, Fat Boy. 1993, original custom tank, 12,000 miles. The girl is desperate. She walked at my 8. Give her until Thursday and she will be back at 6. Lock your buyer in Cincinnati at 35, and we split the margin. Yes, I am certain. She stopped the recording. Stone looked at her phone. Then he looked at her. You recorded him, he said. I turned it on before I walked in, she said. I do that at medical offices, insurance calls, anyone I think might say one thing to my face and another to someone else. I have been doing it for 8 months. Stone was quiet for a moment. Something moved through his expression that was not quite a smile, but was in the direction of one. He turned to the man with the throat tattoo. Vance. Vance Flynn had already taken out his own phone. Stone turned back to Willa. He said, we need to make a call before we do anything else. There is someone who has been waiting 24 years to say something to Earl Decker's family, and he is going to be angry with me if I handle this without giving him the chance. He stepped to the side of the garage and dialed. He waited. Then he said, it is the real one, and she is exactly who Earl was. He held the phone out to Willa. She took it. The screen showed a video call connecting. When the image resolved, it showed a man in his early 70s, sitting in a wheelchair, in a room that had the particular organized quietness of a place where someone had been ill for a long time. He was thin, white-haired with the remnants of a physical size that had once been considerable, visible in the width of his shoulders and the length of his hands. Beside the wheelchair, a portable oxygen concentrator sat on the floor, with its green light steady. The cannula rested across his upper lip. Willa looked at the concentrator. She looked at the cannula. She thought involuntarily of the room on the other side of the wall behind her. The man on the screen looked at her for a moment without speaking. His eyes were dark and very clear. The eyes of someone whose body had been diminished, but whose mind had not followed. He said, you look like him. Around the eyes. He had that same way of looking at something like he was already figuring out what needed doing. Willa said, you are Rex Blackwood. Rex said, for whatever that is still worth. He paused to take a careful breath, the kind of breath a person takes when breathing requires management. I have been on this machine for 9 years. The smoke from that fire did something to my lungs that the doctors spent a long time finding names for. I know the sound your mother hears every night because I hear it too. I know what that sound does to the people in the house with you. Willa said nothing. She was holding the phone very still. Rex said, your father walked into a fire for a man he did not know because it was the right thing to do and the tool was in his hand. That is the whole of it. He never made it into anything more than that, and I respected him for it, even when it frustrated me. I tried for years to find a way to balance what he did, and he would not let me. He was a stubborn man. Willa looked at the green light on Rex's concentrator. She looked at the wall of the garage on the other side of which, 40 feet away, her mother's machine burned the same color. She said quietly, I wonder where I get that from. Rex looked at her for a moment. Something in his face settled. He said, the dead is 24 years old. It is past time. Stone has authorization from me to use club funds for the full amount your mother needs. Whatever the men want to add is their own business, and I expect it will be considerable. You will not argue about it." He said the last sentence the way a man says something that has already been decided. Willa said, "Thank you." Rex said, "Don't. Your father earned it. You are just the one collecting on his behalf." He paused again for a careful breath. "Stone will handle the rest. You go to be with your mother." The call ended. Willa handed the phone back to Stone. She stood in the garage for a moment and looked at the silver eagle on the gas tank of the midnight blue Fat Boy. Then Stone walked back out to the driveway and put two fingers in his mouth and delivered a whistle that cut through the morning air like a blade. All 200 men in the street snapped their attention to him. Stone said it in a voice that carried to the end of the block without effort. He said it the way a man speaks when he has said difficult things in difficult places and has never once needed to raise his voice to be heard. He said 24 years ago, a man named Earl Decker walked into a burning wreck on Interstate 70 and pulled Rex Blackwood out with his bare hands. He burned himself down to the bone doing it. He never asked for a single thing in return. Not once. Not ever. He is gone now. The street was absolutely silent. Stone continued, "This is Earl's house. That is Earl's daughter. And right now Earl's wife is inside that house fighting for her life, and the medical system wants $48,000 to give her a fighting chance." Stone reached into his cut and produced a banded stack of bills and placed it on the hood of Willa's car. "Club Treasury is putting in $20,000, authorized by Rex himself." He unstrapped a worn leather saddlebag from his own bike and held it out to Vance Flynn. "Pass it down," Stone said. What happened in the next 20 minutes was something Willa would spend a long time trying to find the right words for, and eventually conclude that there were no right words, only the images themselves which she carried with her, the way you carry the images that matter. 200 men lined up in her driveway in the cold November morning. They did not jostle. They did not talk. They moved in a line with the quiet orderliness of men who understood that some moments were not for noise. They came one at a time to the hood of her car. Some of them were young mid-20s with new patches and serious faces. Some of them were older than her father would have been, their faces weathered and mapped with years of road and sun and decisions. One man who must have been in his late 60s and walked with a cane took so long getting up the driveway that the man behind him simply walked beside him without comment. They emptied their wallets. A man with forearms like railroad ties put in 3 folded hundreds and did not look at Willa. A man with a gray beard that reached his collarbone put in everything he had and turned his empty wallet over to show it was empty, and then put the wallet in too, and someone behind him in line made a short, warm sound, and the old man shrugged. Vance Flynn removed the chain from his neck, thick gold links, and dropped it into the bag without ceremony. A young man near the back of the line put in what looked like his last 20 and stared at the pavement while he did it, and Willa looked away to give him the privacy of the gesture. The leather bag went down the line and came back to Stone. Stone and Vance counted it on the hood of the car, sorting and stacking with practiced efficiency. When they were done, Stone looked at the total for a moment. Then he gathered it all into the canvas bank bag that Vance produced from the saddlebag and zipped it closed and walked up the porch steps and held it out to Willa with both hands. "I do not know the exact count," Stone said, "but it is over 53,000. You pay the hospital. You get your mother into that program. You keep what is left over for whatever comes next, because there is always something that comes next." Willa took the bag. It was heavy. She held it against her chest. She said, "Before you go." She took out her phone. She held it out to Stone. She said, "You should have this, for Glenn Harlan." Stone took the phone and listened to the recording one more time, standing there on her porch in the cold morning. Then he handed the phone back to her. He looked at Vance. He said the 2 words he had said in the garage: "Ride out." Then he looked at Willow one last time. He said, "Your father never asked for anything. You did not either, but you walked into that man's shop with a recorder running because you knew what he was before he opened his mouth. That is not luck. That is Earl Decker's daughter." He turned and walked down the porch steps. He swung onto his bike, kicked the starter. The engine came up like a thunderclap, and 200 engines followed it one by one, rippling down the line, the sound building from a murmur to a roar to something that shook the last remaining leaves from the oak trees along the sidewalk and rattled the windows of every house on Kasich Road. Stone raised his fist, dropped it. The procession moved. Willa stood on her porch and watched them go, holding a bag with $53,000 in it against her chest with both arms, and she did not look away until the last bike turned the corner and the sound faded from a roar to a rumble, to a vibration, to nothing. The crow was back on the power line. Mr. Thibodeau's newspaper was still on his driveway, the pages slowly loosening in the wind. Willa looked down at the bag in her arms. She looked at the house. She thought about Loretta in the adjustable bed with the concentrator and the green light and the slow, difficult breath. She thought about Rex Blackwood in his wheelchair with his own green light and his own careful breath. She thought about a man on a highway in the middle of the night, a pry bar in his hands running towards something that most people would have run away from because the tool was there and the moment was there and it was simply the only right thing. She went inside. Willa called Miami Valley Hospital from the kitchen table at 9:47 in the morning. She asked for the billing department. She was transferred twice and put on hold once, and during the hold she sat with the canvas bag on the table in front of her and her hands flat on either side of it, and she breathed the way she had learned to breathe when the thing she needed to do was large and the window for doing it was small. When the billing coordinator came on the line, Willa said she was calling regarding account number 4471 Decker L, and that she was prepared to make payment in full for the pre-operative treatment protocol. There was a pause on the other end of the line, the particular pause of someone recalibrating, and then the coordinator said she would need to transfer Willa to the financial counselor who handled that specific account. Willa was transferred again. The financial counselor was a woman named Patricia who had spoken to Willa 3 times over the past 2 months in the careful, measured tones of someone delivering bad news in the gentlest available packaging. Today, Patricia sounded different. Today, Willa sounded different too. Willa said she had the $48,000. She asked what she needed to do. Patricia said she could come in that afternoon and they would process the payment and initiate the protocol enrollment paperwork same day. She said she wanted Willa to know that with enrollment confirmed, Dr. Webb could begin the pre-operative assessment sequence as early as Monday. She said she was glad to be making this call instead of the other one. Willa said she was too. She ended the call. She sat for a moment in the kitchen with the bag on the table and the concentrator cycling in the next room, and the late morning light coming through the window above the sink at the low November angle that made everything look simultaneously golden and cold. Then she got up and went to her mother's room. Loretta was awake, propped against the pillows, watching the bird feeder outside her window, with the expression she wore when she was thinking about something she had not decided to say yet. She turned when Willa came in. Willa sat on the edge of the bed. She did not have a speech prepared. She had not planned how to say it. She just said it. She said, "I have the money. I am going to the hospital this afternoon. They are starting the protocol on Monday." Loretta looked at her for a long moment without speaking. Her eyes moved over Willa's face the way a person reads something they want to make sure they are reading correctly. Then she reached out and took Willa's hand in both of hers, her grip still strong, the way it had always been strong, the grip of a woman who had worked with her hands her whole life and had not lost that even as everything else became difficult. She did not ask where the money came from. Not then. She just held Willa's hand and looked out at the bird feeder, and after a while she said, "Your father always said things had a way of working out for people who did not stop moving." Willa said he was right about that one. They sat like that for a while. Outside, a sparrow landed on the feeder and pecked at the seed and then was gone. Glenn Harlan was eating lunch. It was 11:23 when Stone Carver walked through the front door of Harlan's Vintage Motorsports on Cincinnati Avenue. He came alone. He was not in a hurry. He let the door close behind him and stood just inside the entrance and looked around the showroom the way a man looks at a room he is seeing for the last time calmly with full attention. Outside, Cincinnati Avenue carried its usual Friday morning traffic. But for 2 full blocks in either direction, every parking space at the curb was taken. 200 machines, their riders standing beside them in the cold, not looking at the shop windows, not doing anything in particular, simply present the way a fact is present, the way weather does not need to announce itself. Harlan had come out of his back office when he heard the bell on the door. He was holding a sandwich in one hand and he put the sandwich on the counter and did not say anything. Stone walked to the counter. He placed his phone on the glass surface between them and pressed play. The recording filled the room. Harlan's voice was clear. "It is a clean title. Fat Boy, 1993. Original custom tank, 12,000 miles. The girl is desperate. She walked at my 8. Give her until Thursday and she will be back at 6. Lock your buyer in Cincinnati at 35, and we split the margin. Stone stopped the recording. Harlan's face had gone through several colors during the playback. He settled on a kind of gray. Stone said, "That is fraud. That is consumer fraud and tortious interference. And depending on how the Cincinnati end of it shakes out, there are 2 or 3 other things an attorney could reasonably add to the list. I am not an attorney, but 2 of our members are, and they have already heard this recording, and they tell me those are the words they would use." Harlan's eyes moved to the windows, to the street, to the 200 men visible through the glass standing beside their machines in the cold. Stone reached into his cut and produced a folded sheet of paper. He placed it on the counter beside the phone and smoothed it flat with one hand. He said, "This is a list of 11 other people in the greater Dayton area who have reported similar experiences with this shop over the past 3 years. People who came in with something valuable during a difficult time and left with an offer that bore no relationship to what the item was worth, and then found out later that their items sold for 2 or 3 times what they were offered. Some of them are our people. Some of them are not. All of them have records of the transactions, and several of them have recordings of their own." Harlan looked at the list. He looked at it for a long time. Stone said, "Here is what happens next. You are going to call your Cincinnati buyer, and you are going to return his deposit, and you are going to tell him the item is no longer available. You are going to do that before I leave this building. Then you are going to sign 3 things. The first is a statement confirming that Willa Decker retains full ownership of the 1993 Fat Boy and that you make no claim on the vehicle or its title. The second is a commitment to no further contact with Willa Decker in any capacity. The third is an acknowledgement to be posted publicly on the Dayton Writers Community Board by 5 o'clock this afternoon." Harlan said, "What kind of acknowledgement?" Stone said, "The honest kind. That over a period of years you made a practice of undervaluing items brought in by sellers in financial distress while having buyers already lined up at market rate. That this was wrong. That you are aware of the specific individuals affected and that you are prepared to discuss restitution directly with each of them." Harlan said, "You cannot make me post that." Stone said, "You are correct. I cannot make you do anything." He paused. The same level voice. No change in cadence or temperature. He said, "But I want you to think about what the next several years of your business look like, with 200 Iron Brotherhood members telling their version of this story at every rally, every swap meet, every show, and every diner from here to the state line. And then I want you to think about what they look like if you sign those 3 things today." Nobody moved behind the counter. Nobody moved on the street outside either. Harlan picked up his phone. He called the Cincinnati buyer. The conversation was short and one-sided, and at the end of it, Harlan said the item had been removed from the market and a full refund of the deposit would be processed that afternoon. He ended the call and set the phone on the counter. Stone produced the 3 documents. He produced a pen. Harlan signed all 3. His handwriting was small and precise, and it did not shake, which Stone noted without comment. Stone collected the papers and folded them into his cut. He picked up his phone. He said, 5 o'clock. Dayton Writers Board. I will be checking. He walked to the door. He stopped with his hand on the handle. He turned back and said, "That silver eagle on that tank is not a decoration. It means something. The man who designed it earned what it represents on a highway in the dark 24 years ago, and he did it for a stranger. His daughter is 22 years old and she is carrying everything he left behind, and she did not complain about any of it, and she did not ask anyone for help. You sat across from her and looked her in the eye and offered her $8,000 for a $35,000 machine because you thought she was desperate enough to take it. He let that sit. He said she was not. He walked out. At 4:58 that afternoon, the acknowledgement went up on the Dayton Writers Community Board. Willa saw it that evening when Dana showed it to her on her phone, but by then she had already been at the hospital for 3 hours, and the paperwork was signed, and the protocol was scheduled, and Dr. Webb had shaken her hand with both of his, in the way that doctors shake hands when they mean something by it, and the Harlan matter felt in the context of everything else like a problem that had been correctly sized and then correctly handled. The weeks that followed had the quality of time that moves through water slow and pressured and clear in small sections and unclear in the larger shape. The preoperative protocol began on a Monday in the second week of November. It involved 3 separate treatment sessions per week at Miami Valley Hospital, and a medication regimen that required a spreadsheet to track, and Willa applied herself to it the way she applied herself to any system that needed managing completely and without complaint. She rearranged her work schedule. She traded shifts at the diner and picked up different hours at the warehouse on the days Loretta did not need her at the hospital. She learned to exist on 6 hours of sleep in the specific focused calm of someone who has reduced their life to its necessary components and found that necessary is in its own way enough. Loretta was not easy about any of it. She had not been easy about her illness from the beginning, and she did not become easier about it simply because a solution had appeared. She argued with nurses about her medication schedule. She insisted on walking the hospital corridor unassisted, even on the days when assisted would have been the safer option. She told Dr. Webb in their third appointment that she found his method of delivering information overly gentle, and she would prefer the plain version. Dr. Webb had looked at her for a moment and then laughed a genuine surprise sound, and after that their appointments ran faster, and Loretta's compliance with the protocol improved considerably. Willa drove her to every appointment. She sat in the waiting rooms with a book she rarely read and a coffee she rarely finished, and she watched the other people in the waiting rooms, the other families in their variations of the same situation, and she thought about what her father had said about things working out for people who did not stop moving. She thought about Rex Blackwood in his wheelchair with his green light beside him. She thought about the list of 11 names on that sheet of paper and the various versions of what it meant to be sitting in a waiting room holding something too heavy to hold alone. She thought about the envelope under the seat of the fat boy. Not yet her father had written. She had not gone back to it. She had told herself she would know when the way you know with certain things, not because a sign appears, but because the resistance to it lifts and what remains is readiness. The resistance had not yet lifted. She was still in the middle of it. The middle was not the time. Loretta was placed on the transplant registry in the first week of December. Dr. Webb called Willa directly with the news. He said, "Your mother is on the list." He said it without the careful gentleness, and Willa understood that this was his version of a gift. The plain truth delivered as plainly as Loretta had asked for it. Willa stood in the warehouse parking lot in the cold December dark, with the phone in her hand after the call ended, and she looked up at the sky, which was cloudless for the first time in 2 weeks. And she thought about her father standing beside a burning semi on a highway in the dark. And she thought about the specific way he had looked in that photograph of the bandaged arms and the grin, and she said out loud to no one in particular, "It is working out." Then she went back to work. The lungs came in the third week of March. Willa got the call at 2:14 in the morning, the specific hour that hospitals seem to reserve for news that cannot wait. She was on her feet before she was fully awake, dressed in under 3 minutes, already calling Dana before she reached the garage. The drive to Miami Valley took 11 minutes. She spent 9 of those minutes being very calm, and 2 of them being something that was not calm at all, and then she was in the hospital, and the calm came back the way it always did when there was something to do. The surgery lasted 8 hours and 40 minutes. Willa sat in the surgical waiting room for the full duration. She drank 4 cups of coffee and read 40 pages of a book she did not later remember, and talked to no one, and thought about everything and nothing in a way that occupied a kind of time outside of regular time. The suspended hours that happen in hospitals at night, when the rest of the world is asleep and the particular fluorescent light of surgical waiting rooms turns everything slightly unreal. At 11:07 in the morning, Dr. Webb came through the doors in his scrubs and found her and said, "She is out. She came through clean. She is breathing on her own." Those 4 words. She is breathing on her own. Willa sat with them for a moment. Then she put her face in her hands and breathed on her own too. The recovery took 6 weeks. Loretta was in the hospital for the first 2 and at home for the next 4 with a visiting nurse 3 times a week and a physical therapist twice a week and a medication regimen that had grown even more complex and that Willa managed with the same spreadsheet system, updated and expanded, color-coded by time of day. Loretta complained about the visiting nurse being too cautious and the physical therapist being too careful, and the color coding being, in her words, a little much. Willa told her it was not a little much. It was exactly the right amount of much. In the 4th week of April, Loretta walked to the end of the driveway and back without stopping. Willa watched from the porch. She did not say anything. She just watched her mother walk to the end of the driveway and turn around and come back breathing upright, moving through the spring air under her own power, and the sight of it was so ordinary and so enormous at the same time that Willa had to look at the tree line for a moment to keep her face where she wanted it. On a Saturday morning in the second week of May, Willa went to the garage alone. The spring had come in the way Ohio springs come in tentatively at first, and then all at once the trees going from bare to fully leafed in what felt like a single week, the air losing its edge, the light shifting from the flat white of winter to something with warmth in it. The garage door was rolled all the way up. The morning came in at a low angle and hit the chrome of the fat boy and sent small reflections moving along the wall. Willa looked at the bike for a moment. Then she walked to it and unlatched the seat. The envelope was there, slightly more yellowed than it had been in November. Still sealed, still waiting. She took it to the workbench and sat on the stool her father had sat on for 20 years. She turned the envelope over once in her hands. She looked at her name in the black marker, the familiar loops and angles. She looked at the two words below it. Not yet. She thought about November, the bag on the kitchen table, the hospital, the waiting room at 2 in the morning. The moment Dr. Webb came through the doors, she thought about her mother walking to the end of the driveway and turning around and coming back. She slid her finger under the sealed flap and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded in thirds, the kind of lined paper torn from a standard composition notebook. Her father's handwriting covered the front and part of the back, the large, careful letters of a man who wrote slowly because he wanted to get it right. The date at the top was April of 2019, 2 years before he died. He had been 57 years old. She read it. He began without preamble the way he had always begun things. He wrote, "If you are reading this, then I was right to write it, which means my heart finally did what the doctors have been telling me it was going to do eventually, and I am sorry for that. I am sorry I will not be there for whatever comes next, because whatever comes next is going to be significant, and you deserve to have me there for it. You have always deserved better backup than you got, and I want you to know I know that." Willa stopped. She read those two sentences again. Then she kept going. He wrote about the mortgage. He wrote that the title to the house was in the metal box in the top of the bedroom closet behind the winter blankets. He wrote that his union pension would transfer to Loretta automatically and that the paperwork for it was in the same metal box. He wrote a list of the things in the garage that were worth selling and the approximate value of each organized by category, with the name of one honest buyer for each category, a man named Phil Sturdivant at the swap meet on Route 4, who had always been straight. He wrote that the lawnmower needed the blade sharpened every spring, and that it was not hard to do, and that he had left the sharpening tool hanging on the pegboard above the second shelf on the left. She read all of it. She read the practical parts, the way you read the practical parts of something important, quickly and completely understanding that the practical parts are not the small parts. They are the love translated into the language of maintenance. They are what a father who fixed things leaves behind when he knows he will not be there to fix them. Then she turned the page. He wrote, "Now I want to tell you something which I have never told you or your mother, and I want to tell it plainly because you deserve the plain version." She recognized that phrase. She had said it herself more than once in the last 6 months. She had thought it was her own. She sat with the recognition for a moment. He wrote, "In October of 2001, I was driving home from a double at the mill on Interstate 70 when I came on an accident. A motorcycle club called Iron Brotherhood had been hit by a semi. There was fire. A man was pinned under the burning cab. His name was Rex Blackwood, and I did not know that. Then I just knew he was a man on fire, and I had a 4-foot steel pry bar in my flatbed. I want to be precise about this because I do not want you building it into something it was not. I was not brave. I was not a hero. I was a man with a tool who got there at the right moment. That is all it was. I wedged the bar under the frame and I lifted, and the weight and the heat were both considerable, but the alternative was watching a man burn to death from 20 feet away, and I have never been the kind of person who could do that. The burns were real. The shoulder was real. I told your mother it was a welding accident because the true version would have worried her for 20 years, and the shoulder healed well enough, and I did not see the point. I may have been wrong about that. I was not wrong about your mother worrying. Rex Blackwood is a man who does not forget and does not let debt stand. He built the Fat Boy and gave it to me and told me I had his club at my back for as long as I owned that machine. I want you to understand what he meant by that. He did not mean a courtesy. He meant it the way men like Rex mean things completely and permanently. I believe him. I have never had occasion to test it, and I do not expect that you will either, but I want you to know it is there. If things ever go completely sideways, baby girl, and I mean really sideways, the kind of sideways that cannot be fixed with a phone call or a second job or a really good spreadsheet, then put that bike up for sale. List it where the Brotherhood can find it. They will find it. They have people watching for that eagle the same way you watch for something you left somewhere and intend to return to. When they show up, and they will show up, you tell them who you are and you let them help you. That is not charity. That is a debt being paid. The difference matters, and I need you to understand the difference. She stopped reading. She sat on the stool for a moment with the letter in her hand and the morning light moving on the wall and the sound of birds from the oak trees along the sidewalk. She thought about a really good spreadsheet. She thought about her father at this same workbench, writing these words, knowing what he knew about his heart, doing what he always did, preparing the ground for the people he was going to leave behind. She kept reading. He wrote, "The eagle on that tank does not belong to me. Del Pruitt painted it the way I drew it, but it was never mine in the way that it was always mine to explain. The broken chain means you walked out of something that should have killed you. I walked out of that highway in 2001. Your mother walked out of whatever comes for her. She is tougher than she lets on, and you know that better than anyone. You have been walking out of things your whole life and not saying much about it. You come by that honestly. Here is what I want you to know. The eagle does not belong to me. It belongs to whoever needs an army. You will know when. And Will, I think you already do." She turned to the last paragraph. He wrote one more thing. "The bike runs fine. I have kept it in a perfect condition. The battery will need a charge, but everything else is ready. I know you never asked to learn to ride it, and I know I never pushed you because I did not want you to feel obligated. But if you ever want to, the knowledge is in your hands the same way all mechanical knowledge is. You do not learn it in your head. You just start the engine and let your body remember what it already knows. That is how I learn. That is how you will learn. Start the engine, baby girl. See what happens." She read the last line twice. Then she folded the letter back into thirds along its original creases and placed it in the breast pocket of her father's flannel shirt. She sat on the stool for a moment in the May morning, listening to the birds. Then she got up and went to the fat boy and put her hands on the handlebars. She stood there feeling the weight and the balance of it. She checked the fuel, which was low, but not empty because Big Earl had never put a machine away empty. She connected the battery tender and waited the 10 minutes for it to read fully charged and then disconnected it. She took her father's helmet from the shelf where it had sat for 5 years. She looked at it for a moment. She put it on. It fit as well as it could fit. Her head was smaller than his had been, and the padding held it firmly, and she buckled the chin strap the way he had taught her, one finger between the strap and her jaw. She threw her leg over the seat. She settled her weight. She found the foot pegs with her boots, the steel-toed boots that had been his and had taken the shape of her feet. She found the ignition. She turned the key. She put her right hand on the throttle, and she did not hesitate, and she did not think about whether she was ready, because her father had told her the knowledge was in her hands, and she had learned in the last 8 months to trust what was already there. She kicked the starter. The engine turned over. It caught on the second kick. The sound came up like something that had been waiting to happen, deep and powerful and patient. The V-twin rhythm of a machine built to last and maintained to last and loved well enough to last beyond the man who had loved it. The garage filled with sound and the smell of exhaust and motor oil, and the vibration traveled up through the foot pegs and the handlebars and settled in her chest alongside the heartbeat that was her own. The sound went out through the open garage door and across the backyard and around the side of the house and into the front yard and down Keswick Road. In her room, Loretta heard it. She turned her head from the window where she had been watching the bird feeder. She sat very still for a moment, her hands in her lap, listening. The sound was unmistakable. She had heard it 1,000 times over 24 years, and the sound had only ever meant one thing, the same thing it had always meant, which was that he was home. She knew it was not him. She knew it with the full clarity of a woman who had learned to carry what she knew without putting it down. But she sat very still and listened to the sound of that engine running, and she let herself have those 30 seconds without correction, without the careful work of distinguishing what was from what was not. She let it just be the sound. Then she picked up her cane from beside the bed, and she stood up and she walked slowly down the hall and through the kitchen and out the back door, moving carefully the way she had learned to move in the last 6 weeks, each step considered and deliberate, and hers. She came around the corner of the house to the garage. Willa was sitting on the bike with the engine running. She had not moved it out of the garage. She was sitting still, both hands on the bars, her father's helmet on her head, and her eyes were closed. Loretta stood at the edge of the garage and watched her daughter. The engine ran. The sound filled the space under the eaves and went out into the May morning. The silver eagle on the gas tank caught the light the way it always had, deep and oceanic, the broken chain in the talons, the spread wings. After a while, Willa opened her eyes. She looked at her mother standing at the garage entrance with the spring morning behind her, and the cane in her hand, in the plain, steady face of a woman who had been through the version of the fire that does not happen all at once, but slowly over months, and had come out of it breathing. Loretta reached out and placed her palm flat against the ground tank over the silver eagle, open and still. "He never told me either," she said. "Stubborn man." Willa looked at her. She said, "I wonder where I got that from." Loretta looked at her. The corners of her mouth moved. Not the careful, managed expression of the last 8 months, but the real one, the one that had its own weather, the one that Willa had been waiting 8 months to see come back. "Stubborn," Loretta said, "is how we are still here." She lifted her hand from the tank. She turned and walked back toward the house, moving slowly and deliberately and on her own. Willa watched her go. She watched her mother walk across the yard in the May morning, each step measured and careful and alive. Then she turned back to the handlebar. She felt the engine running through her hands and her feet and her chest. She thought about the letter in her breast pocket. She thought about the plain version. She thought about "Start the engine, baby girl. See what happens." She released the brake and rolled forward out of the garage and into the morning light. And the sound of the engine filled Keswick Road from end to end, deep and patient and ready, the way a thing sounds when it has been maintained with love and has been waiting without complaint for exactly this. 8 months later, on a Tuesday evening in January, Willa received a text message from a number she had saved under Stone Carver. It said, "Rex went quiet last night, in his sleep, peaceful. He wanted you to know he was glad it all worked out the way it did." Willa sat with the message for a moment at the kitchen table. The house was warm. From the living room, she could hear the television, the nature documentary channel that Loretta had taken to watching in the evenings, something tonight about birds of prey. No concentrator, no mechanical rhythm, just the house and the warmth and the sound of her mother watching birds. She looked at the message for a long time. Then she typed back. She wrote, "Tell him we were never even. My dad was just being my dad." She sent it. She set the phone on the table. She sat in the kitchen in the quiet house on Keswick Road, and outside the January wind moved through the bare oak trees and rattled the garage door very slightly, the particular sound it had always made in winter. And she listened to it and thought that it sounded, if you were in the right frame of mind for it, something like an engine at idle patient and ready waiting for the road.